On September the 8th, 2019, I published on my Medium blog an article that was titled Welcome to Oldham Part 3. It focused on two strands. The first strand was the presence of a convicted sex offender as the chairman of Oldham Central Mosque, who I was campaigning to remove, which I successfully removed. Took some time and effort. The second element was to do with a dossier of emails that I shared in the public domain, which demonstrated the cover-up of the grooming and gang rape of children in Oldham. So the first that most people knew of this scandal goes back to that article that I published on September the 8th, 2019. That article was subsequently taken down as a result of lawyers acting on behalf of Oldham Council or Greater Manchester Police. I never got to the bottom of it, but Medium took it down in an attempt to censor and silence what I'd released. Clearly enraged, I then took to social media, created my own webpage, republished all of it, and challenged the police to arrest me. They never arrested me on that claim. Fast forward to 2024, the Secretary of State, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon, the Labour Party Secretary of State and MP for Oldham West, and aided by the Labour Party, is threatening to sue me over information I released in 2019. Well, sue me. Because what has transpired is as a direct consequence of the campaigning that I have led at the full council meeting on the 10th of July 2024, Oldham Council passed a motion writing to the government requesting a public inquiry. Now, it's not the public inquiry I wanted, but it is a public inquiry. And what I'm going to do over the next couple of dispatches is go through what transpired in that council meeting and provide some analysis of that. Again, these are my views and my opinions, but take them and leave them. Believe me, believe Arud Shah, believe Mark Ince, believe the council-funded Oldham Times. The reason why this is unusual is that the Failsworth Independents and the Oldham Group, as Mark Ince's team are known as, the four councillors could have brought the motion forward themselves. Instead, they brought the motion forward as part of the administration business, the Labour Council business, but not a single Labour Party councillor is either proposing or seconding or speaking on behalf of the motion. Shahid Mushtaq says some things, but he speaks not on behalf of the motion. He really uses it as an attack on Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani, as you'll see later on. So first of all, it's strange that this council is having a motion on CSE as part of the administration business. That's the Labour Party Council's business, Labour Party's business, but it's brought by Councillor Brian Hoban of the Failsworth Independent Party and Councillor Mark Ince from Shaw and Prompton. Now, the issue, it's worth bearing in mind that both Councillor Brian Hoban and Councillor Mark Ince have been rewarded handsomely for helping prop up Arud Shah's administration. Anyway, enough of the context. Let's bring on what happened.
Item 10, Notice of Administration Business. You have 30 minutes for both motions. Motion 1, advice for those affected by child sexual exploitation in Oldham. I call upon Councillor Hoban to move and Councillor Hinz to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand to move this very important motion, and firstly I'd like to thank the council leader and the administration for giving up this space within their time on the agenda to allow us as independents to give it the time that it deserves in this meeting. This motion is not about finger pointing or point scoring. It's not about the members in this chamber or the people with lots to say on the issue online. It's simply about those who have been affected by these disgraceful, despicable crimes, a group of people who have featured far too little in much of the noise on this issue in the past few years of the survivors. When we set out to bring this motion, we reached out to survivors who have been affected, some victims themselves, some whose family have been affected in other ways. And we've seen the devastating impact that this form of abuse has caused. We talked about what they wanted from an inquiry and how it would help them. They said that more than anything, they wanted a voice. The 2019 review had not offered those affected the chance to provide their own testimony, their own experiences, in their own words. Even those whose cases had been included had limited opportunity to be directly involved. They knew there were others involved, both men, women, boys and girls, whose stories had not been heard, whose cases had not been reviewed, and who deserved that opportunity to get answers about what happened and if and how it could and should have been prevented. In addition, they were worried that the period of the review covered was too restrictive, and they felt it didn't provide the answers to anybody whose experiences were outside of that remit. It wasn't what they wanted. What they wanted was a fully independent inquiry, independent of the council, independent of GMP, and to have the powers to request and get full access to any evidence it needed. An understandable ask given their experiences. And this led us here. We've been here before, trying to get this in front of council. A formal request has been sent, or will be sent, with this motion to the Home Secretary for a full Home Office-led public inquiry into CSE in the Borough of Oldham. An inquiry with no restrictive dates, an inquiry that seeks testimony from anybody affected who comes forward, and an inquiry that finds answers about what happened, about what could and should have been done to protect them, and an inquiry that supports the investigation and prosecution of the evil people that carry out these crimes. This motion is that simple. It asks us, as elected members, to make representations to government to give these survivors exactly what they want and what they need. And I hope I can rely on people in this chamber to deliver that. However, I'm not naive, and neither are the brave women that we are working with. We know there is a chance that we will not be granted a Home Office inquiry, but we have to ask, because it is what will deliver the answers that they want and how they want. However, if we're not successful, we have another way. We won't give up or walk away from seeking justice for any of those affected and the consequences for the perpetrators. Instead, we will initiate a fully independent inquiry, as they have had in Telford, to meet the very same objectives of seeking testimony and getting answers and supporting prosecutions. We are at present working towards that, should this application to the Home Office fail. I want to end by sharing something else that those affected would like me to share, and that is, for too long, people have sought to politicise this issue, sought to spread misinformation, and even, and even very recently sought to undermine and harass the very people who were the victims of these horrendous crimes online, purely to serve their own selfish interests. I can tell you that those affected don't want arguments about this issue. They don't want slanging matches in the chamber or unfounded allegations being thrown about by politicians. They want answers, and they want the answer to the questions that they have about their own experiences. They want the opportunity to tell their stories and give their testimony, and that testimony to be acted upon. Most importantly, they want to make sure what happened to them does not happen to anybody else. One more paragraph, please, Mr. Mayor, and then I can finish.
You're out of time, sorry, and out of extension as well. Apologies.
Okay, so what we've got is Councillor Brian Hoban of the Failsworth Independent Party saying he doesn't want to politicise this. Well, the Failsworth Independents and all of the independents who are now in this council chamber are in part in this council chamber because the cover-up of the grooming and gang rape is a political issue. It's a political issue because it involves senior politicians, senior council officers in the council chamber. 3 successive council leaders were removed from safe Labour seats because of this issue. The entire dynamics of that council chamber have changed, instigated by this campaign that we have led into attempting to secure a public inquiry. We've been clear from the outset we wanted a public inquiry. Now, I wrote this on the 8th of September 2019. And this council meeting took place on the 10th of July 2024. My apologies. 2024. So that's what's took place. And during that time, we have had removed from power 3 successive Labour Party leaders. And at this time, 47 Labour councillors, and now they have 27 Labour councillors. And we removed, first of all, Sean Fielding, who now in his bios doesn't even make reference to how he was leader of Oldham Council. We then removed Arood Shah, who then was moved to Glodick, St Mary's, where she was re-elected. So we moved her out of a white ward, or a mixed ward, and it was off the campaign of the cover-up of the gang rape. And we also removed Amanda Chadderton. So 3 council leaders were removed from power as a direct consequence of the work that we have done. And during this time, I've lost count actually, but I think there was 8 attempts to call in the government. All of them had been blocked by the Labour Party. And then this council motion now, this motion on the 10th of July, latest motion, some might think is a success. It isn't. But we'll get to that. What I want to focus on first of all is what Brian Hoban has to say. The focus on a public inquiry according to Councillor Brian Hoban is to give a voice to survivors. And that is something he repeats and double downs on throughout the conversations on this motion, throughout this debate. If you give a voice to survivors, what they want the public inquiry to focus on is here the testimonies of the survivors, and what they also want is to bring to justice the rapists. What they have omitted is the entire failure of every agency and every politician on 2 elements. 1, who failed to do their jobs, and then 2, who covered it up. And of course, if you continue this, you've got those who have blocked the attempts for a public inquiry. So there's all of that has been omitted from Hobin's. Hobin focuses purely on the testimonies and to bring to justice those who have been responsible for the rapes themselves. Brian Hobin focuses on, or starts off by, talking about how Arud Shah has given up time and he wants to thank her. Brian Hobin could have brought this motion himself. They have the numbers to bring forward a motion. This is just political posturing, and what should have happened is if Arud Shah and the Labour Party were supporting it, what should have happened, what ordinarily would happen in circumstances like this, is that Arud Shah would present the motion as the leader of the council. You're writing to the government for a public inquiry, for heaven's sake. The leader of the council should be presenting that motion. Not only does she not present that motion, she says absolutely nothing through the entire debate. I'll play it all, you'll see. She says absolutely nothing through the entire debate. And if she wasn't bringing that motion, at the very least, she or someone senior from the Labour Party administration, the deputy leader, the person in charge of children's services, so on and so on, they should have seconded that motion. So they're playing politics and distancing themselves. And what's also clear is that there's been an agreement, some form of negotiation between the council, the Labour Party administration, and Hobin and Hinson and their team in protecting politicians and policy officers and police officers and members of the press who are all involved in the cover-up. This isn't just about hearing the testimonies of survivors. Hobin also claims he's reached out to survivors. He doesn't say why he's reached out to survivors, how he's reached out to survivors, how many survivors responded to him, how many he met with, or where he met them. Now my information, and this is my information, if I'm wrong by all means correct me, but this is my information. Brian Hobin has been meeting in his pub with survivors. That's right, Brian Hobin has been meeting in his pub. And there are 3 survivors, but they're not what I would call survivors of the grooming gangs. Now let's clarify what the grooming gangs are. The grooming gangs, which is this is what this is about, were predominantly Pakistani. And they were led by a guy called Shabir Ahmed. He was famously known as Daddy, or infamously known as Daddy, and he's the ringleader of the Rochdale grooming gang. But Shabir is from Oldham. And not only was Shabir Ahmed from Oldham, he was employed by Oldham Council at the time, a senior member of the Labour Party at the time, and he had access to children. He was also on the board of trustees, or management committee, or whatever the term is, of the Citizens Advice Bureau. And that is a board by invitation only, membership by invitation only, of the great and the good in the town. So that's how powerful and influential Shabir Ahmed was. All of this was kept hidden until I released it, and it has subsequently been confirmed. Now, if that's what the grooming gangs are, you would have assumed that the survivors that Councillor Brian Hobin makes reference to would have been victims of the grooming gangs. My information is that they have 3 survivors. The first survivor gave up her anonymity is of course Sam. Sam is not a survivor of the grooming gangs. Sam went to a police station to report rape. Her story is well evidenced. The police officer handed over to 2 men who raped her, and then she was picked up again and raped again and raped again. Horrific. What happened to her is horrific. But she's not a victim of a grooming gang. The second survivor, who's online, is a parent. She's been abusing me non-stop. One of the reasons she's been abusing me is because she used my platform to name the councillor, or former councillor, who she claims groomed her son. And then her son committed suicide. She's not neither a survivor, nor does her child, deceased, fit what you and I would know as the grooming gangs. And when I make reference to these grooming gangs, it's gangs of Pakistani men, predominantly in Oldham, Shabir Ahmed and others, who are grooming children, picking them up from the school gates, that sort of stuff, well evidenced by now. The third one, I'll leave her anonymous for now, I've spoken to her, is not a member of is not a victim or a survivor of the grooming gangs in this context. Her story is very different. I believe her. I have no reason to doubt her. But she's not a victim in this classic model of the grooming gangs, which involve Shabir Ahmed and many others like her. So, these survivors, no. With the greatest of respect, they're not survivors of the grooming gangs. Not to say that their views and opinions aren't important, of course they are. As you've heard, Brian Hoban wants people, and he says the motion is that simple. Those are his words, motion is this simple. He wants to identify and prosecute those that carried out these crimes. Brian Hoban, throughout his speech, makes no reference to those who failed the children, makes no reference to those who covered up the children, makes no reference to those who covered up the cover-up, and makes no difference to those who tried to criminalise myself and other campaigners for exposing what had taken place. So that's why, in my opinion, this motion has been supported by Arud Shah, because it seeks to protect the Labour Party and the council and the police and all the other agencies involved. Let's move on to what Councillor Mark Hinds has to say.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Hoban and his colleagues for bringing this motion to the Chamber today, and I'd also like to extend that thanks to the Leader of the Council and the Administration for hosting the motion to ensure it gets heard as it should be first. We've, in terms of myself and my colleagues, have always supported a full independent inquiry into historic child sex abuse within the borough. Not for votes, because as the truth is on the doorstep, it's a subject people did not want to talk about. But it's a subject people need to hear, because bringing this motion forward is something which is the right and proper thing to do. In fact, it was our first stipulation when we entered into a working agreement with the current administration. So, for too long, this subject has been used as a political football, both in the chamber and outside of it. And it's also been used, in my view, as a revenue stream for online grifters, something I find despicable. I had the humbling pleasure of meeting some of the survivors recently, and it was a very, very emotional experience for myself, hearing their stories and reconciling, as someone who's got young children, the horrors of this subject. So I ask everyone in this chamber to support it for what it is. It's not a political motion. It's all about the survivors, and I hope and pray, by showing transparency and honesty on this subject across all parties, it will give people confidence to come forward and be part of this inquiry. So once again, I'd like to thank the survivors for coming forward and showing the bravery and the determination that they have. And I appeal to everyone in the chamber to vote it through. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things to point out with Councillor Mark Hints. First of all, you can see he's doubling down on what Brian Hoban is saying around the survivor focus. It's not about politics. He claims it's about focus on survivors. Again, he doesn't say how many survivors he's spoken to. You know, he thanks the survivors who've come forward. Well, how many? How many survivors have come forward in co-writing your motion? As I've shared with you my information in terms of survivors of the grooming gangs, it's 0. Councillor Hints also focused his attack on myself, as did Brian Hoban, where he talks about grifters, online grifters, a revenue stream for online grifters. Councillor Mark Ince is now earning tens of thousands of pounds a year as a direct consequence of this issue and how we've campaigned on this issue and how this online grifter has led this issue. Councillor Mark Hints, of course, is a drunk. He phones up people late at night, drunk, abusing them. My understanding is that this is now a police matter, Councillor Mark Hints. Now, he wants people to support the motion on this survivor focus inquiry that avoids holding to account any politician, any policy officer, as in council officer, any policeman or woman, and any member of the press involved in the cover-up. So you can see the deal that's been done, and you can see how both Hoban and Hints, in particular Hints, are attacking me. Well, if you think attacking me is going to make any difference to me continuing to try and get this issue over the line, then you are yet to know the sort of man I am, Councillor Mark Hints. Councillor Mark Hints is wrong in what he's stating and is wrong in his position on this public inquiry. Because it's not a public inquiry. Because a public inquiry would not seek to exclude those responsible for the failings from being investigated. So that's where Councillor Mark Hints is up to. Mark Hints, for those of you who are unaware of him, likes to dress up as a Nazi and Zig Heils, with a right hand raised like this, Zig Heils in council meetings. He's now part of the Labour Party administration, although he claims he isn't, but he is. Along with Brian Hoban. They're voting for him, they're voting with him, and they've been rewarded with positions of power and wealth. But the question really is, Councillor Markins, how many survivors have you and Hoban met with? In designing, co-designing this survivor-focused motion, which omits holding all of these people to account, omits holding the politicians to account, omits holding the council officers to account, omits holding the police to account, and omits holding the press to account. How many of these survivors, so-called survivors of the grooming gangs, have you actually met with? My information is 0. Let's move on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support this motion. Councillors Hoban and Hintz's ask is simple. Give those affected a voice, don't presuppose anything, don't rule anything out either, but enter into an inquiry process that seeks the truth by looking at the evidence. That and the fact that the motion has been co-written by some of those survivors are ample reason to support this ask. It is possible to campaign for what you believe in without endangering the children of today, without spreading falsehoods and without creating a false impression of the Council's children's services. The issue of non-recent CSE is not something that should be used by anyone for electoral purposes, whether that be local elections or parliamentary elections. Nor should it be used to diminish the impact on victims or to divert the course of justice for anyone directly or indirectly involved in the horrors inflicted on innocent children. I don't say this to shield any individual or group from criticism or scrutiny. All of us should be held to account. However, Mr. Mayor, this, like the intense 3-week Ofsted inspection into our children's services carried out in May, needs to be evidence-based, not unfounded, obscure comments made in speeches in this chamber so the videos can be clipped and shared as absolute truths. Accountability applies to all of us, including those making baseless allegations. The outcome of the Ofsted inspection into our children's services will be published on Friday. The process was an intense 3-week inspection with up to 9 inspectors scrutinising individual cases, delving into every department, speaking to young people, carers, staff.
Okay, I'm stopping him now. He then goes on to abuse Sam, by the way, which is a interesting exchange, but that doesn't really matter for here. So what? Councillor Shahid Mushtaq, whose brother is Tahir Mushtaq, remember? The one who published my address and claimed I was gay in an attempt to incite violence against me, protected because his brother is Councillor Shahid Mushtaq. And that's after I exposed Councillor Shahid Mushtaq and his other brother, I think Tariq Mushtaq, in some land deal of near Alexander Park that hadn't been declared in the right way. Actually, no, a number of years ago now, but I still maintain councillors should not be, or their immediate family members should not be involved in buying land off the council, particularly when the process is not as transparent as it should be. But that's a conversation for another day. For here, first of all, Councillor Mushtaq claims something co-written by survivors. It adds gravitas and they're willing to support it because it's co-written by survivors. Councillor Mushtaq seems to miss that the 7 or 8 times that they voted it down, that is voted it down, survivors were screaming in the public gallery when they voted it down. The only reason they're voting this through now is that they think they can contain it, and also that it was the price to pay to buy for politicians to keep control of power. Those are my views. If you think any differently, by all means tell me. But no, it's the only reason he's supporting is that it's for politicians that they needed to deal with, and also that it continues to protect key individuals involved in the cover-up and the failures at the time. Councillor Mushtaq also, let me write this down, makes reference to the spreading of falsehoods. Councillor Mushtaq does not give one single example of what the falsehoods are that he claims to. So there is no avoidance of any doubt. What I've maintained from the outset is that children were groomed and gang raped in Oldham. I've maintained that the council knew and failed them. I've maintained those involved were, and it's specific to Shabir Ahmed, employed by the council and I've also been very clear that Shabir Ahmed was a key Labour Party figure known to councillors who still sit in this council chamber, friends even. One councillor has told me directly that he knew him and he got on with him. And, most significantly, when they knew about all of this, to maintain community relations, the council, led by Jim McMahon, whilst council leader, kept the information that children were being dragged off the street and gang raped hidden from the public. And I use the BBC emails to evidence this at the time. With the police emails all released at the time when Welcome to Oldham Part 3, and I also use as evidence subsequently the assurance review itself, which confirms that the council actively, whilst Jim McMahon was leader, the council officers actively sought to keep this information from the public domain. McMahon, in his defence, claims he wrote something on his blog. Of course, he wrote something in his blog at a time when people did not really read online blogs, months if not years after the grooming gang, in terms of this information around the shisha bars was taking place, and the BBC emails. And, well, as you can see, which part of this is a falsehood? Everything I have claimed has been proven to be true. So I'm not sure what falsehoods Councillor Shahid Mushtaq is referencing. Perhaps the falsehood is Councillor Shahid Mushtaq, who blew up Arooj Shah's car. Was it really a racist attack? Arooj! Are you okay, Arooj? Well, Councillor Mushtaq, was it really a racist attack? Would you leave your car unlocked in Glodick? I'm not an expert in the blowing up of cars, but I'd like to think that you'd smash your window first to get in rather than open an unlocked door that you knew would be unlocked. And contrary to what Arooj Shah claimed, that car was not parked outside her house, or suggests that car was not parked outside her house. Greater Manchester Police, of course, are desperately looking anywhere but where the evidence leads. And of course that should be incorporated into this public inquiry. But it won't. I don't even think you'll get a public inquiry. And he also states that the issue should not be used for elections. Of course it should be used for elections. People campaign on issues, Shahid Mushtaq. Let me give you basics in politics. I know you don't need it, Alexander, where the cartels just deliver, sackfuls of postal votes because of, they vote by clans. But in an ordinary functioning democracy, people campaign on issues. And the issue of the cover-up of the gang rape of children is a political issue, and people are right to campaign on it. Just as unpalatable as it may be for some people, people are right to campaign on the issue of Gaza. Even though, we can't do anything about Gaza as a councillor, but that hasn't stopped people from exploiting it for personal benefit, Oldham Group. But people have a right to campaign on whatever issue they want. That's how elections should be won. Wouldn't you agree, Councillor Mushtaq? Rather than which Pakistani clan your family comes from. Mushtaq then goes on to attack Sama al-Hamdani extensively, because Hamdani has bravely, he's gone on his own journey and come to the same realisation that the rest of us. That we need a genuine public inquiry that is free to go where it wants, how it wants, and to uncover this truth across the board, whoever it implicates. And remember, for a period, the Lib Dems were in power. So they have much to risk here as well, but to give Sam the credit, he wants it dealt with, which is why Mushtaq goes after him. Lisa Nafesi then speaks. Maiden speech. Lisa Nafesi, listen to this.
Sat at the back of this public gallery with members of the public. I've listened to the pleas and the harrowing cries of help for a full independent public inquiry for the grooming and gang rape of girls and boys in this very borough. These people have been failed. All who have failed need to be brought into account. The survivors, parents of loved ones need justice. I wholeheartedly support this motion.
She uses the term groomed and gang raped. This is a term that I have repeated from the beginning. Groomed and gang raped. She also says everyone that fails them. Listen carefully. She also says bringing to justice everyone that fails them. Or bring into account. Bring into account, I think is what she said. Bringing to account everyone that failed them. Unfortunately, I don't think Lisa Nafesi spell her name. Lisa Nafesi, I don't think she's on the same page as Mark Ince. Because Lisa actually wants what we want. She wants justice for the survivors. And as to get that justice for the survivors, part of that has got to be bringing into account everyone that failed them. Hince, to secure justice, simply wants to hear the testimonies and to go after the perpetrators. with you, Lisa. And I think over time you'll find that you're not on the same page as Councillor Mark Hince. And I think over time you'll get pushback from the people of Shaw, who are on the same page as me and you and the thousands in this town. We want the lid blown off, the cover up. Because we're not going to get to justice without it. And if now the Secretary of State, Jim McMahon, is innocent, well then, let's see. But you've all seen those emails the same as I have. Simply saying, you wrote something in your blog after the Rotherham case was exposed and made national news. Well, what about the period in between? You were the leader, McMahon. You're the leader of the council. Of course, in all of this, up to now and still, and they all speak about it, go around the houses on it. How many children? Well, it seems that the Oldham group ChatGPT, I don't bloody know, chat whatever, make up something up for us. Councillor Wahid, Bandwagon Wahid and his fake Oldham group, sectarians. Well, they might not know how many children, but they're very, very clear it's just a minority from the community that are responsible. Let me play it for you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, honourable members, today we stand on the cusp of what may transpire to be a significant milestone in our quest for accountability and justice. The administration has put forth a motion seeking a public inquiry into CSE, a motion that echoes the long-standing calls from the opposition for a comprehensive and transparent investigation into the heinous crimes that have scarred our town and our communities. The administration has in this motion admitted their previously launched steering group was limited in its collaboration with survivors, did not go far back enough or dig deep enough. Yet, time and time again, this very administration voted down our calls for a public inquiry. It is for that reason this feels like a bittersweet moment to see them finally acknowledge what was so obvious to the rest of the town. Although this motion still falls short of the comprehensive approach that we have been advocating, should the new government refuse our demand for a public inquiry, the alternative in this motion is not actually fit for purpose. And despite these shortcomings, I stand here urging every member of the opposition to vote in favour of the administration's motion. Firstly, it marks a breakthrough with this administration, who has conceded on their stance and has been cornered into asking the government for a public inquiry. And secondly, because the voices of the survivors compel us to do so. These brave individuals who have endured unimaginable suffering have made it clear that they want us to support this motion. My conscience cannot allow me to vote against this motion that represents a call for a public inquiry and has survivor collaboration, regardless of who presents it or whom it is presented on behalf. I take these precious seconds of my already reduced time to thank Councillor Horbin for making this happen. Thank you, sir, and well done. This motion, although imperfect, represents a step in the right direction. By voting for this motion, we acknowledge their admission of their shortcomings. The people of this town have had enough of division and strife born from the actions of a tiny minority. Let us pass this motion unanimously and send a strong message to the new government that Oldham is united in its demands for a public inquiry. And to conclude, Mr. Mayor and Madam Leader, Oldhamers will not stop until we get to the truth and justice is duly served. Thank you.
So that's your speech by Councillor Abdul Wahid, aided by ChatGPT. Actually, it wasn't bad, was it? I mean, the sectarians, I have no time for them. They jumped on the bandwagon here. But nonetheless, he makes some relevant points. First point he makes relevant is that it's an admittance of fault by Labour. It's admittance of fault on 2 points. One is the shortcomings of the assurance review. The narrow scope. The absence of independence of the assurance review. The involvement of the council. And its exclusion. I mean, you still can't get away from it, can you? Exclusion of survivors' testimony. And that will be the downfall of Andy Burnham. I don't think he's quite worked it out yet, because where this ends, Andy Burnham, will be a review of your so-called experts, Ridgway and Newsom, and how they excluded survivors' testimony. So if the council had had its way, when Burnham's report was published, that would have been the end of it. It didn't have its way because of what we did. And what I did in terms of reading the entire report and pulling out every shortcoming, every failing, and campaigning relentlessly. Not Councillor Abdul Wahid. That's fine. This motion clearly demonstrates the admittance of fault. Even though Arud Shah's not standing up to speak on it, even though the motion's been presented by 2 independents as part of the Labour Party's own time. Now let's bring up Helen Bishop. I'm trying to be fair, so everyone who spoke analysing and critiquing. So Helen Bishop, Lib Dem councillor, who at the time when we released this information, Helen and I, well, we're not friends anymore, she doesn't speak to me, but we were old friends. And she contacted me to say it was all true, what I was doing, and she went on the front page of the Oldham Times, where she said, people can't handle the truth. Helen now has become a politician, and with becoming a politician, I suppose you need to make compromises. But here's Helen Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad to see that the administration have brought this proposal, finally, to write to the Home Office and request a full public inquiry. I think we all agree, and it's good to see that we now all agree that it should have been done a long time ago. I'm glad that survivors' concerns from years ago have finally been acknowledged, and it has finally been recognised that the assurance review was not enough to satisfy the level of public concern. It shouldn't have taken so long. Many hours of council time when it had been taken up, and this could have been done years ago and avoided a lot of distress and rehashed trauma for survivors, as well as squandering time that should have been spent identifying and helping those currently at risk at CSE. This is not a historic issue. This is an issue that is ongoing in every single town up and down this country. And CSE, I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff in this chamber. I'm going to go off piste a little bit now, because I've heard a lot of stuff in this chamber, and nothing yet in it has convinced me that there are any experts on CSE in here. Now, there are experts on CSE in the country. Have we been interacting with them? Have we been getting in touch with them? Have we been getting advice? That I'd love to know. Coming back to the motion, I'm surprised and disappointed that that a request for the publication of the minutes of the steering group are missing from this motion, and also a more regular update to full council more than once a year. This can be addressed in future meetings. The first part of the motion, realistically, is the only one necessary. What happens afterwards should only be consideration once we have that response, and that needs to come back to the full council before we decide what we do after that. Hopefully this new government will be obliging though and grant us a public inquiry. The issue of CSE is a very specialised area, and that level of expertise does not exist in this organisation. Any future investigation needs to be completely independent, both the council and GMP. You cannot scrutinise yourself. Other agencies to be involved to cover all the dimensions necessary to support those involved in current cases and past. For example, you have Bernardo's, who've been leading on this for a long time. They have a lot of specialists, people who could help us. Dr. Sophie Hallett at the University of Cardiff. If you look into some of this work is already there. She worked with survivors over 10 years, and the findings of her research really need better scrutiny by this council. She found there's a lack of cooperation and coordination that really is key to dealing with this issue. And one of the things that came very strongly, and it's a quote from young people, is that CSA doesn't just happen. It happens because young people don't get the help they need. I hope the letter to the Home Office was very clear in its request for a full public inquiry, and I do think the letter needs to be approved by all group leaders before being sent. If the request is denied, then we need to go back to the drawing board. We should not be cobbled together on the hoof as this is. I'm very concerned by, for example, terms such as preparing the framework, continuing to work with survivors. There's nobody in here with that sort of expertise. This needs to go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop.
Okay, Councillor Helen Bishop. Couple of points. The point I disagree with, she says this issue has failed because of a lack of coordination. You can hear her in terms of safeguarding children who are victims of CSE. I don't talk about CSE as in the widest term of CSE. I'm very specific to the grooming gangs. You've all seen my campaigning on this issue. Coordination and cooperation. An absence of, she claims. No. The grooming gangs were protected because of what we now know as political correctness, fear of being branded racist, contempt towards working class white girls, which is a racism in its own form, but this racism came from the middle class white policy officers, the police and all of that, and of course the political undercurrent. This is about votes. Pakistani and Bangladeshi, predominantly the Pakistani communities, block vote. Block Labour Party vote. That's what's going on here, Helen. The failure is not because of a lack of coordination or a lack of cooperation. And you know that, Helen Bishop, and you know better. However, Helen does have some valid points. her valid point includes the council are not experts. So they shouldn't be doing it. They should bring in experts. Bring in experts. And before anyone asks, no, there's not a chance in hell Harood Shah or her council or anyone linked to this will be bringing me in. Because they will not they cannot handle the truth, as Helen Bishop once said. Bring me in, you won't be able to handle the truth. The second point, Helen's very clear on, is the assurance review wasn't enough. Same as Councillor Wide. So the assurance review failed. Andy Burnham's assurance review failed. If Andy Burnham's assurance review hadn't failed, we wouldn't be here. She highlights this motion itself concerned minutes of the CSE steering group, the council's own CSE steering group. The minutes are missing. That suggests the beginning of a cover-up already, don't you, on how they're trying to frame this? Why would you not share the minutes with your own councillors? And she's right. You shouldn't cobble all of this together. The motion should first and foremost just be on the public inquiry. And if the government say no, then this will be a separate motion on the independent inquiry. And brought back to council. I think she used the word failed, but she meant it. She uses the word compromised. So there you have it. Yeah. Well done to the Liberal Democrats. Speaking on the motion. We now move on to Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani, who I omitted it because I didn't want to play it. Shahid Mushtaq, gangster style, attacking the guy for no reason whatsoever. And then we have this interaction. Which I'll play now, before Sam speaks.
Have a point of clarification, concerns I've been told you want to.
Yes, just a small point for my passionate councillor behind me. It's not an administration motion, it's an independent one. There's no politics involved in this. Thank you.
Sorry, point of order, Mr Mayor. Given that motion one is meant to be for the administration...
Oh, it's been said it's been hosted by
No, hang on. How is this possible?
Don't hang on, sorry. No. It's been said that it's been hosted by administration, Councillor Craig.
So are they part of the administration, yes or no?
It's been hosted by administration. I'm not the leader, and I said.
Well, can we get clarification on that?
I can give you a part of clarification on that. No, we are not part of the administration. We have a working agreement with them. It's something separate. I don't know what your arrangements are in your coalition of chaos, but there we go.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I'm going to bring people back to the motion. Thank you very much. Councillor Al-Hamdani.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I rise largely in support of this motion. I'm disappointed by some of the tone that's been taken because people took the time, both before this motion came forward and in the debate, to say that this wasn't a political motion. And people are choosing to interrupt people while they're speaking, People are choosing to politicise this. I'm not angry about the words that you said, Shahid. Generally, I trust you. But I'm disappointed. Now, I think that the most important thing here, as people have said, is the survivors and what their experience is and how they're helped. And in some respects, they're helped by having a full inquiry. In some respects, they're helped by getting the support that they need. In some respects, they are helped just by being listened to. And it's very important that we respect the different things that people need. And it's important that when we go into this process, that people who are survivors of this and do not want to have to relive this know that they are also safe, that they won't have to relive those experiences, that if they need support, that is still continued. I think one of the things that the Council has done better in the 2 years since this was published is providing support and is working with people. But I think it's really sad that we are 2 years past the publication of this inquiry, the investigation that was carried out by Greater Manchester on behalf of this council, and we're acknowledging only now its failings. That's let people down for 2 years. And I think that you really have to look at yourselves and acknowledge what's happened and what you've done. Now, I fully support this investigation. I hope that the Home Office does support it and does carry out the investigation. I hope that there is no need for a Telford-style inquiry, but I would support one if needed and if that's what survivors want. I think it's important that as we speak to survivors, I'm aware, Councillor Hoban, you've been reaching out to people and talking to them. But that hasn't been happening as a neutral process. You yourself are a member of a political party. It's the Failsworth Independent Party, but you're not part of an independent inquiry. And I think it's really important that as these things are taken forward, we should avoid things like that, because the accusation that could be levelled against you, and I utterly believe you have the best of intentions, is that that is biasing the inquiry, and again, will fail to deliver a truly independent result. And I hope you look at yourself and what you're doing and find a better way of doing it than what's been happening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the people who brought this forward. Thank you to the survivors who have spoken out. And to the ones who haven't, you have our support, and I hope that we manage to deliver something that is what you need. Thank you.
So considered words by Sam, even though he was personally attacked by Councillor Shahid Mustaq completely unnecessarily and attempted to be interrupted by members in the council chamber. Not by members of the public, but by people in the council chamber. So considered words, but he raises a number of issues that I think is relevant. The first one is 2 years since the publication of the report, as in Andy Burnham's assurance review. What it doesn't make reference to, but what I have made reference to, it's actually just under 5 years from when I exposed it. Okay, so 2 years, and they're only now, because the Labour Party, you've heard the confusion around who it is, whether it's the Labour Party or it's the Independents, but it doesn't matter, it's the administration's business. So it's Arood Shah's business, and they vote with it. But what's clearly taking place here is an admittance. Every councillor who stood up has made reference to it. It's an admittance that Andy Burnham's review failed. Was a cover-up. Didn't get to the truth. either by design or through the actions of the investigators, or by the powers they had. You'll have to decide that for yourself. I think it's a combination of all of them, personally. In the 2 years, Sam, you'll know that on multiple occasions, including Arud Shah herself, has voted to block calling in the government. We go back to when I first released it 5 years ago. Well, we all know what's happened there during that period, don't we? The second point, the next point that Sam Hamdani makes, is that Hoban is compromising the inquiry. He's asking the question, actually. Is Hoban compromising the inquiry? And that's because Brian Hoban is meeting with these survivors in his pub. And remember, they keep referencing them as survivors. Again, as with the number of survivors in the widest context, in this entire council debate, neither Hoban, Hints, Mushtaq, anyone has said how many survivors co-designed this motion. My information is, again, 0 in terms of survivors of the grooming gangs. But Hamdani supports the public inquiry letter. Clearly it won't happen. This Labour administration won't do it. And then if it doesn't happen, he's supporting a Telford-style inquiry. But a Telford-style inquiry I will get into detail later, because you've heard Brian Hoban, who put forward this motion, make reference to a Telford-style inquiry. So I'll get to that Telford-style inquiry later, once we reach that part. Brian Hoban then gets up and speaks, and they all vote it through. When Brian Hoban gets up and speaks, he admits that he doesn't have the experience, blah, 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 goes on. But he makes one thing that I think very, very interesting and very, very relevant. And concerning. Concerning's the word. He sees no reason to bring this back if the government say no. Remember what Helen Bishop said? Some of the wording? Hamdani's references? Now, it needs to come back to the council. So whatever inquiry, whatever this Telford-style inquiry is, if the government say no, whatever this Telford-style inquiry is in Oldham Council, needs to be approved by the council. It needs to be approved by the council. The council officers cannot be trusted to commission it. Arud Shah and their councillors cannot be trusted. So if the government say no, and that's what you go for, and I'm not happy with this, by the way, I'll share that at a later date, that Telford-style inquiry needs to be approved by the council. A motion needs to come to the council detailing exactly what it is. Ordinarily, in a council meeting, when they bring a motion like this forward, the opposition, the Conservatives in particular, would have had the opportunity to amend this motion. And I know they tried to amend it to strengthen it, to widen it, so that it also references those involved in the cover-up, those involved in the failings. They also tried to widen it to make sure that the Telford-style inquiry has the correct legal terminology. They were prevented from putting forward an amendment. This is unprecedented in this council. They were prevented from putting forward an amendment. This is what tyranny looks like. When an opposition party is prevented from putting forward an amendment to a motion. Those of you with memories long enough will recall how, when we have took forward motions calling for a public inquiry or for the government to come in, those motions have been scuppered by the Labour Party, including Arud Shah, who've put forward their own amendments and voted through their amendments repeatedly. Yet in this instance, the attempts to bring forward amendments to this motion were blocked. Nonetheless, we are where we are. Everyone voted it through, and then we moved on to the Conservative motion on a CSE inquiry. More thorough, more detailed, and that's where the fireworks start. I'll bring that to you next time. If you find value in this work, these are dispatches. I call these dispatches. I'm setting out with. Now this is the second of the dispatches. If you find value, well, tell people. You can buy me a coffee if you want. You can buy me a samosa if you want, but spread the word, tell people. Our target is to get to 1,000 subscribers by September on Redwall and the Rabble, paid or otherwise. And if we can get to 1,000 subscribers, then we can continue to share the work universally for free. What am I? A grifter? Drifter? Grifter? Well, if I'm a grifter, at least I'm not a drunk. If I'm a grifter, well, where else are you getting this type of information from? Where else are you getting this type of analysis from? And let's be honest, if not for this grifter, would this vote have even taken place? If not for this grifter, would this vote have even taken place?
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.